It looks like you have a mustache. I haven't seen you in person. I'm seeing you over the Zoom here. The beard's coming back. A little mustache. You just had your 10-year anniversary.
I just had my 10-year anniversary, man. 10 years.
Sam is a saint.
She is. We went to Chattanooga. We were on a hillside cabin, and I thought, it's kind of squatchy out here. Gotta watch out.
Yeah, did anything weird happen?
No, but we did watch the documentary of the guy we're about to interview, so look at that.
Look at the segue.
Yeah.
So nothing weird happened.
Nothing weird happened, but we were in this cabin watching this documentary called Big Fur, which is about this world-renowned taxidermist who's like the best at his gig. He created an actual Sasquatch, and I thought, I gotta get this guy on the show. Luke's gonna love this guy.
This guy, I mean, I watched it last night to prepare for this, and I wasn't prepared for just how good of a mullet he had. Like pre-documentary, they had some old photos of him and old video, and he just had, I mean, just straight Canadian hockey cut. And apart from some other really interesting parts of this documentary, it's fascinating.
You know, you're kind of you like your beards, you like hair. You really notice the hair on other people, and you're a hair guy.
Dude, I guess so. Thanks. I'm trying to keep my hair as long as possible.
Well, Big Fur, it goes with the Squatch, and just hairy guys. I mean,
well, I got a good buddy who he played in the NHL for like 12, 13 years, and we were talking about, I forget what it was. It was like mustaches. We were watching the Conor McGregor fight a few weeks ago. And he was saying that he really wanted to get after his wife a little bit, and the way he wants to do it is just call it Summer of Mullets. He's just going to grow a huge mullet this summer. He's trying to recruit me into it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, you ever played hockey? This is like second nature for you. Amy and I are trying to start a family. Don't know if that's going to hurt or help the cause. Who knows? I might just grow a sweet summer mullet, and it just could make my fertility go through the roof. Who knows?
Yeah, it could. It could just get that testosterone pumping. And
it's it's like a mullet is like Oprah, and she's like, "Oh, kid for you, and kid for you, and one for you," and
There's a lot of country stars coming out with mullets now. It's kind of coming back. I've seen a couple guys.
Dude, Miley Cyrus had one on the Super Bowl stuff.
Well,
I mean, I'm just pointing out. I mean, this transcends in gender. What's that term? They're like gender somethings. Who knows? Yeah, it's norms or...
You're going to give us some more one-star reviews if you keep going.
Let's go back to this real quick. Before I turned 30, I was living in San Diego, and I was finishing up my master's degree. And I had this just dream, just a young man in San Diego with a dream. The dream was that before I turned 30, I needed to have a mullet. Now, I was bartending during my master's just because I needed to support myself through school. And I thought, man, this mullet, it's going to really hurt my tips and everything else, because it wasn't like now where people think it's super cool again. But man, it did not. People were into it. I had this little ducktail and I had a mustache, and I was not quite 30.
Where are the photos?
I was crushing it. We can put one on. We'll put one on Facebook.
You need to put that on the old Blurry Creatures Instagram.
Actually, I did it because, as it would be, on my 30th birthday, I had to renew my California driver's license at the time. I live in Tennessee now, so this is way back when. But I had the sweetest mullet in my California driver's license picture. I feathered it out and everything, and then I moved to Tennessee like 2 years later and had to trade it in, unfortunately, because it was like one for the ages.
I love that story, dude. That I get this vision of you with the mullet now, and we're gonna post the photos, everybody. We're gonna put it out there that there was a time in Luke's life where he was Big Fur himself.
Dude, it was. It would have been a great nickname.
Dude, it's been wild. We can talk about the show a little bit, developments before Ken hops on. We've had a lot of messages come in. A lot of people telling us their stories. If we don't put out an episode once a week, we've been starting to get some like, hey, when's the next episode coming out? Come on, you're killing us.
What are you schleps doing?
Yeah,
what are you schleps doing out there? Like, hey, dance monkey, dance.
I know.
Like, we need this.
The people like what you're doing, Luke.
No, they like what you're doing. They like your juice. They like what you bring to it. And you know what? But you deserve a nice little trip away for your 10-year anniversary. And people can just deal with it.
I know.
There's a 1-star, another 1-star for that.
You got to leave people wanting more. That's something that bands do. They put out an album and they disappear for a while. It's like, when's the next record coming out? Come on.
Yeah. I can't wait to talk to Ken about Sherwood, and then we can just bring up. We've got two just voices of angels that just live inside this episode.
This guy's a true talent, and I will say that
he actually can sing.
I mean, taxidermy. For those of you who don't know,
you're talking about taxidermy. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that too. I mean, that's one of his talents. He can sing, and his other talent is he can take something dead, paint it, sculpt it, stretch it. I mean, it's like 10
incredible,
skills
actually.
in one, right? You have to have, it's not just like, oh yeah, I'm this artist, I can paint something. It's like, no, you got to have all the talents and all the skills.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because it is an art. Like, you think about, like, if you're going to paint a picture, you know, of something that exists, it's not like abstract art or like impressionism or something. Like, you're doing like a real, like, photorealism painting, which are, some of these are amazing if you ever Google that or look on Instagram.
Yeah.
But you can hold it up against the real McCoy. Well, I mean, in taxidermy, same thing. I mean, you got a real, you know, you got like a real bear, and then here's your bear that you just made out of styrofoam and clay with bear skin.
Yeah.
And it's got to look like it's alive again. And that's, I mean, it's got those magic hands.
Yeah. I mean, I guess probably you were like me before you watched the documentary. You didn't realize taxidermy is pretty difficult. I mean, you have to get the eyes perfect, and you have to go to a glass maker who makes the eyes out of glass, and he paints them perfectly, and you have to go through, he'll send you various eyes, you have to go through all that. It's a complicated process, stretching the skin, and then you sew it back together. Anyway, we learned a lot, Luke and I, and we were like, this guy, we got to get him on the show. He was supposed to be here by now.
Get him.
But
I mean, Alberta time, what is it? It's probably the same as us, actually.
all right, let's get him on the old speaker. There we go.
Dude, you just got to put that one in there, bro.
Well,
Hey, Ken.
yeah, no, I just realized I just unfroze my septic. It's minus 40 here, but anyways, I'm just going in there now. So, is there a link on the Facebook?
Yeah, I just sent it to you.
Okay, I'll be there in a second.
Awesome, thank you. Bye.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
The Smithsonian, that if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. We're called Blurry Creatures. We talk about ancient giants, Bigfoot, Nephilim, all the weird stuff, whatever you want to talk about. But we've both seen your documentary, and we thought we got to bring you on the show and talk about Bigfoot. And
cool, yeah. Dan did a good job of making a entertaining movie. Actually, you know, really, it was like for me to sit through a theater at Sundance. It was a little horrifying, but
sure,
yeah. You know, it is what it is. You sign on to do a movie, and whatever they catch on camera, I guess you got to go.
Yeah. Oh yeah, everything, right? Everything's fair game then.
Yep.
Yeah.
Luke's brother was on a TV show, so Luke knows a little bit about that.
They cut out. See, I was on one episode, and they cut out all of my good jokes, everything that I did that was hilarious, and tried to make it all very serious. It's unfortunate.
There's the blooper reel that goes with Bigfoot is hysterical, really. I forgot all about it. It made me laugh.
I like that.
That's hard. How do you make a documentary about that and make it interesting? That's a challenge for anybody, because a lot of subjects, you know, you get into it. Where's the storyline? Where's this going? You know, even a lot of interesting topics, there's always a twist. One of my favorite documentaries. Have you seen the one about Donkey Kong? You seen that one?
No, I haven't.
I haven't seen that either.
It's called A Fistful of Quarters. It's about two guys who are the world champions of Donkey Kong.
Okay.
And it is riveting. I think you learn about video games and the competition. Anyway, it's a really good one. It's probably one of my favorite documentaries.
It's not like making a full size Bigfoot though.
No, nothing like that.
I've had people wanting me to do that for years, even before I believed that they were out there.
Yeah.
And I used to always say that I don't make anything unless I have a reference. But when I saw the Patterson film slowed down and zoomed in and stabilized for the first time, it took me about 30 seconds to realize that was a real creature. Because that's what I do. That's like, you know, when I worked at the Smithsonian, the reason they brought me in is because I can build a 3-dimensional model from 2-dimensional reference.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, they had to go all the way to Canada to get me. If they give me like a Patagonian Mara that they necropsied and screwed up the body, I have to be able to look at a photograph and basically recreate the anatomy. So I look at a lot of things, but as soon as I saw her walking, the first thing I noticed was, first of all, her shins are shorter than her femur, which is outside human parameters. And it's the reason the shin is horizontal to the ground when it walks. And I was saying, why is this thing's walking with its knees bent, because it must weigh 1,000 pounds, like shock absorbers. Like, there was a whole bunch of information that I was looking at. And I also used to, when I was a kid, I used to do special effects. And I remember the lizard man from Star Trek, and that was state of the art for the same time Patty was filmed. I realized right away, I said, that thing's real. And also the width. Her width is way outside of human parameters.
That's a good point. I didn't thought about, like, if you take the CGI from that same, or not even CGI because it wasn't computer generated then, even if you took the special effects from that same era, it's not even close. No. Which is crazy. Nate, should we start off like we usually start off? And ask
yeah. All right, welcome to the show. Ken Walker. Ken, you are a world-renowned taxidermist. You're super talented, because anyone who knows anything about that field, you have to have many skills to recreate animals. It's not just painting, it's not just sculpting, it's all the above. You've won awards, and you recreated the Bigfoot that the community loves, the Patty. Is it Patty, or is it just your own version based off Patty?
Oh, we called her Patty from the get-go.
Okay. Yeah, we've talked about that on our show. We brought Jeff Meldrum on, and already you've said some things about your trained eye and how you can take two-dimensional photograph and create a three-dimensional character. And already you've described some things that are interesting to me, that you almost see colors that other people don't see, and it would take that skill almost to look at this animal walking in that footage and go, that's real because of this, this, and this. And most people just can't see those colors.
That's right.
In that video that you can. And that takes a whole lifetime, 10,000 hours or more of training to be able to see those things. And so right. That's what got your fascination going? Just that video?
The fascination got that. I mean, it came back to me. I mean, when I was a kid, I was into it. Obviously, that was in the movie, but then you grow up and you say, no, you get kind of brainwashed like everybody else. And but then I started hearing stories through the hunting community, because, a taxidermist is like the hairdressers of the hunting community. We get all the rumors, we know what's what, where's where. And I got two very, very good friends told me Sasquatch stories that were undeniably true from their point of view. Like, they weren't lying, and they were too detailed. One was tracks along the Brazu River by a taxidermist I know very well, who said, it was 40 years ago at the time, and he said, they may not be alive today, but they were 40 years ago when I found the tracks on a sandbar. And then another friend of mine, a very good taxidermist named Wade Pearson, his grandfather, before he died, he gave him his car and told him about running into a Sasquatch while he was walking out of a logging camp in British Columbia, to the point where when he got to town, he went home. He got on a train and went back to Edmonton because he couldn't go back and face the people in the camp because of what he had seen. And, this is a dying man telling this to his grandson. And I realized right away, he's telling the truth. So that's when I launched my investigation in the hunting community. And now I'm known for collecting these accounts. People come to me out of the blue. And a guy sent me a nice photograph a few weeks ago, a nice snow track, and it's a Sasquatch up in the Nordegg area. He was on a pipeline crew, and he said, man, my buddy told me to call you. What is this? And I said, well, that's a Sasquatch. Then he went back to camp and told everybody that I think these are Sasquatch tracks. And one of the guys said, well, I wasn't going to say anything, but he saw the darn thing on the right of way and decided he was never going to tell anything.
Wow.
This is just a few weeks ago. This happens all the time. I had 4 mountain lions come in this year into my shop. All 4 guys told me a Sasquatch story. All 4 guys.
Really?
Yeah, like the amount of people in the hunting community that have seen or are seeing Sasquatches is off the charts compared to what people know.
And do you feel like people can tell you those things and they can't tell their other hunting buddies because you're approachable? You're in a kind of a different branch of this community where they just feel like, I can tell this guy my story, versus a lot of people are afraid of ridicule,
They're terrified of ridicule. And the thing is that the reason they tell me is because I have credibility in the industry.
That was the word I was searching for.
Maybe less now, but no, I have credibility. And so, and people really need to get this stuff off their chest. And they would really like to have a conversation with somebody as to what did I see? Like, what is going on here? How can this be? And so when I tell them, I says, did you know there's 500 reported sightings a year? And they look at me and they says, really? And I says, yeah. And I've had like 36 people come through the shop and not one person has reported a sighting. So what does it tell you? It tells you that there's probably 30 times as many people seeing them as are reported. And we all know that's true. Anybody who goes into this field knows that's true.
Yeah. And what's your best encounter that you've had with these creatures?
Well, it's funny because you have to search the memory banks. I talk about about something running across the road 30 years ago down in the Swan Hills, down the old Simpson Timber Road. And there was 2 of us, and I yelled bear. We were bear hunting in the spring, and this thing booked across the road and cleared the ditch, and then it ran up a hill without slowing down. Now, that was the thing that got my attention, because even a bear can't do that. This thing had not just momentum, it had unbelievable power, and it made it look easy. And I said, well, the guy with me said, is that a Sasquatch? And I said, no, it has to be a man, because I didn't believe at the time. And it ran into straight bush faster than a human can run, really, now that I put it in retrospect. And I didn't get out and look at the tracks, because had I even thought that Sasquatch was a possibility, I would have done that. I just figured it was some dude dressed in head to toe in black that was going to get shot if he wasn't careful. He was in the middle of nowhere. And it turns out that area now I've gone back and found the tree structures there, and it has a history of sightings.
Ken, is that some of the stuff we saw in the documentary where you were showing the tree, like the tree structures and in the woods? You're in Alberta, you're up in Canada. Just for people, I don't know, people, we didn't come off the top and say that, but those are things you're talking about, like where the trees were interlocked, and then it's like crazy. It's like they built like a teepee without the skin on it.
Yeah. And usually if there's an area that has any kind of accounts in it, like more than one, if it's an area where they're known, I'll find them there. And I look for them everywhere I go. I don't find them everywhere. I only find them in certain places. And if I find one, I find 2. So there's the high tree breaks, the ones that are about 10, 12 feet up, where the trees are broken. I watch for those. And if you follow the direction that they're broken, it'll lead you to another one. That's interesting. And then, of course, the tree structures.
Was it Patterson-Gimlin? Was it all the stories from these hunters, or was it your own experience? You think that really pushed you into the camp of believing in this creature?
The 2 stories that I got, the ones that I told you that started me off, that made me decide to look into it. And it was what happened afterwards that put me in the camp of believer. And I know certain people that have been out in certain areas, like out west especially, that are known for Sasquatch sightings, that have hunted their entire lives. And I went straight to them. One person in particular was a trapper, and we all know about the Alberta Habituation site, and that's how I found it. Is he took me out there, and he took me right to a nest where I collected the. Well, he didn't take me. His brother did. He refused to go out there. He told me.
Scared? Was he scared to go out there, or he just was it that, or?
Yeah, there's some things that happened that I'm still working with that I can't really talk about. But he said that he was there for 6 years, and there was a lot of strange things happening. Things moved around, and he said, and then one day, one just walked up on the road in front of him. He says it took about 6 years of going there before they accepted him. And they just showed themselves. To the point of, he said one encounter, a big female walked out in front of him with a very small young one walking on all fours. And then another big female came out with a adolescent-sized one walking on 2 legs. So there was 4 of them in front of him. And he said, no male, just 2 big females and 2 young ones of varying age.
That's interesting. They get to know you, and then they feel more comfortable with you slowly and present themselves. You said earlier in the podcast, you mentioned brainwashing, and that's something we don't talk specifically about that on our podcast, but all these topics, they sort of scratch the surface of, have we all been brainwashed? You kind of mentioned that. When was that moment where you kind of felt like, I've been brainwashed, or what I've been told isn't true, and you started to change the way you saw the world?
I've learned quite a bit about what I like to call them belief systems. And there's a really great deleted scene from Bigfoot that Dan had actually emailed to me because he thought it was so funny. And I was just being a little bit pissy about the whole thing one day. And I says, there's people out there that because of their belief will go into a market and they'll blow themselves up into like 3 million little tiny pieces just because they think they're going to get 72 virgins. I says, and everybody thinks I'm crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously though.
And yeah, but that's the truth. And the thing is, belief systems are really hard to change. I tell everybody, before I investigated this, if the police came to my door and said, we're looking for somebody in a murder case, and somebody saw somebody who looked a lot like you there, where were you last night? Well, I know I was home watching TV, right? That's what I would say. I was home watching TV, like it wasn't me. But from what I've learned through these investigations, if I even think there's a chance that man standing at the door actually believes I did it, I'm calling a lawyer.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, I'm with, man. I listen to true crime. I'm a true crime guy.
Yeah,
and
like
that's one thing you learn. You learn like it doesn't even matter at some point if law enforcement or the powers that be believe that you are that person. There's no reason, innocent, guilty, whatever. You need to lawyer up. My wife is a big conspiracy theorist in the sense of she thinks that all that stuff's going to happen to me somehow, and I don't really do anything to convince her that. But she's like, remember, if anything happens, you always can ask for a lawyer. Doesn't mean you're guilty. Like, thanks, hon.
I'll tell you something right now that I don't really like talking about. I spent time in China, and one thing I learned about the people in China, they were wonderful people the people, the average person, they just want the same thing we all want. They want to raise their families. They want food on their table. Obviously, they have a totalitarian system where they are, you're not allowed on Google, you're not allowed on Facebook, you're not allowed access to a lot of information. But one thing I found out with the Chinese people is they're unbelievably intelligent. And yet they believe some of the craziest stuff. And it was at that point that I understood that doesn't matter how intelligent a person is, they can be brainwashed. Mm-hmm. And that scared me. That really did, because these people are super smart. And I think that you can brainwash almost anybody.
Well, it's a psyop, right? I mean, you keep repeating the same lie over and over again, and then people begin to accept it, even to the point where, in light of any sort of evidence or logic, they'll accept it.
Create a narrative, and create a narrative.
The hard part is a lot of times something is true, right? Something happened, something exists, there is a truth out there, regardless of your bias. Something is true, and that's difficult. Yeah. And we usually ask our guests, what do you believe Bigfoot is? And it's funny because Dr. Jeff Meldrum's, he's like, I don't like to say I believe in Bigfoot. I'm convinced by the evidence. That's what he says. And I guess that's the question. What do you think Bigfoot is? Everyone has a different opinion so far. What's your belief or your feelings or your knowledge? What is it to you?
I've investigated a lot of shootings, people who've shot Sasquatches. And I learned a lesson with the Sierra kills that I'll never really share those accounts anymore. Because that turned into a mess. It just turned into a mess. Because I was the first one to talk to Justin Smeja. Well, I talked to not most of the shootings that I investigate. The Sasquatch runs away. I met a guy at a hunting convention in Salzburg, Austria, almost a year ago, and we just got to talking. And he was a guide in the U.S. and he told me straight up. He says, I shot a big Sasquatch south of the border, the Canadian border in Montana. He said near Waterton, and he said I pile drived it. He says I smoked it, and he said that thing ran away, and I could not find it. So most of the cases I talk to people, it runs away. But I have talked to people who've killed them on sight, and he says, and they told me that they're the hardest thing you'll ever kill. Which, if you've ever hunted Africa and you hunt baboons or any kind of primates are the hardest thing in the world to kill. They have more tenacity than anything. So a Sasquatch, from what I've heard, is almost impossible to kill. But I've talked to people who've stood over them, and they said they're people. They're a hominid. They're not an ape. They're close enough to human that they actually believe they could be in a lot of trouble, which is why in a lot of the cases, there's been quite a few shooting cases where nobody ever talks again. They cut their losses and they leave. And even people who are willing to talk are really not willing to talk because, they're human. They're close to human enough. So I believe they're hominid just from the evidence that I've heard and the anecdotal evidence. But then again, I tell everybody, if it was a big dumb ape, I would already have stuffed one in the Alberta Museum here.
Yeah. And for those listening, that famous Sierra Kills story was that guy Justin. Wasn't he from Yuba City or Chico or Northern California?
Yeah, he's from he was in California, and it happened in the Sierra Nevadas, I think, on the Nevada border somewhere.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not really sure where it happened.
But you said there's a lot of drama that came with that story.
Yeah, like all as I knew was when he was on the taxidermy forum, and he said, you guys might want to call BS, but I shot one of these things. So I sent him a private message, and I says, I need to talk to you. What's your phone number? So he sent me his phone number, and I remember he told me the story. Like the guy knew at that time, he knew nothing about Sasquatches. The first thing he said was, I don't understand. This thing was dirty white. He said, I thought they were supposed to be black or brown. Well, anybody who reads case files knows that about like 3 or 4% of them are light colored. And they go all the way from orangutan orange to jet black, which is what the trapper up here told me. All the ones he sees are jet black. And then he said when the young ones came out, I asked him right away, I said, were they walking on 2 legs or on all 4s? And he said half and half. And as soon as he said those 2 things, I knew he was telling me the truth. And I know a lot of people in the hunting business industry. And listen, as much as we hate to talk about it, there are people, and they can seem like completely normal to everybody else, that will shoot and kill everything they see.
Yeah.
Those people are out there. They're not the majority, but there are people that if they know that what in front of them isn't protected, they'll shoot it. And and you don't even know who this person is until they do it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that would never shoot at anything that they didn't want to keep or didn't understand. And it was a perfect storm. That day, the Sasquatch stepped out in front of somebody who was willing to shoot them. As you if you read the account, the guy with him, they had a big fight about this, But what I did is I told some people about it, and then I was told that nobody was going up there to investigate. And I know Sasquatch now. I know they retrieved their dead. I didn't know that back then, so I thought that this thing might still be up there in the cold. Of course, it wasn't, and so it just all these people got involved, and then I was accused of wanting to make money off of this thing, and I've never made a dime off anything Sasquatch related, Even the thousands of hours that I put into my recreation, I just gave it to Dan because, he spent $250,000 of his own money to make Bigfoot.
Really?
Yeah, this isn't something that I ever even remotely wanted to make any money with. I've never been paid a dime in the Sasquatch industry. Never.
Okay, speaking of that film, how has anything changed for you since the film came out? One of my questions was going to be if you had offers to people to buy that, and since it sounds like you gave it to Dan, but has stuff changed for you since that came out? I mean, people look into you for expertise, or what's different now since the film?
I have people reach out to me who said they saw the film, and they'll ask questions like, about the personal stuff that happened, or about the taxidermy. The biggest thing with Big Fur is, there's a surprising amount of people that haven't seen it. Because for some reason or another, the subject matter for the average person, it just isn't something that makes them want to click on it,
Yeah.
But anybody who does, they all say the same thing. They say, wow, what a great movie. I watched it 3 times. I mean, nobody watches an independent documentary 3 times. And yet people
Nate
tell
does.
me
Nate watched this, and he was like, you got to watch this Big Fur thing. Nate, I got to tell you, Nate watched this on his 10-year anniversary trip with his wife in the middle of nowhere, watched Big Fur.
My wife downloaded it. So
that's crazy.
Oh wow, Sam, that's phenomenal.
Well, my wife will watch Bigfoot documentaries with me, so I can't complain.
No, that's awesome, and that's how it should be.
Some of my friends are like, my wife, I can't even bring it up. She'll leave the room. Well, she hates it.
If you watch Big Fur, you know what my ex-wife thought of the whole thing.
Yeah, you were in hot water a little bit.
My wife watched it with me last night. Amy and I sat there and watched it. And she was like, this is really fascinating. I mean, I think she was more impressed by, frankly, the skill, the things you're able to do with that styrofoam. I think if you haven't seen the film, you need to watch it. Just at the very least to appreciate just the art that goes into, the things you pulled out of, and this is just not to blow smoke up your dress can or anything, but the things you're able to shape out of those pieces of styrofoam is frankly amazing. It's no wonder that you have the accolades, and, you work for the Smithsonian. I have questions about that too at some point.
Well, the thing about it is, and this is what I tell everybody, is that I was just as excited as anybody else, because once that thing was standing in front of me, I mean, I built it from reference. If I build something from reference, it's accurate. And I was like, holy crap, I'm standing right in front of a Sasquatch. And I know this is a Sasquatch because I built it from the evidence. And that, like, I remember the first time I pulled a lion skin over top of a saber-toothed smilodon form that I made, and I got goosebumps. This animal was extinct for 10,000 years, and it was looking back at me. And I know because I built it from the skull, I know that it was accurate. You know, the Irish elk, the same thing. Like, wow, this thing's like 10 feet across the antlers. And I just built it according to cave paintings and skeletal measurements from the Smithsonian, you know. So I get just as big of a charge out of this as the people who are observing it. You know, I do this just as much for myself as for other people.
Yeah, it's a great gift to people because, I mean, the chances are of us as human race ever having a Sasquatch that we can look at like we're going to a zoo is probably never going to happen unless we get a dead one, and then, you know, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories with that. But you kind of gave people a real chance to look into the eyes of Sasquatch. I mean, I would guess there's probably only a handful of people in the world that have your talent, like maybe 4 or 5 people that can do what you can do. Do you feel that way?
But I've trained a few people that can do what I do, including Amy, the girl that was in the movie. But being able to train people who are capable of it has helped a lot. There's a girl right now that I trained from South Korea. It's a good friend of mine named Gina. She's a lot more talented than I am. It's an interesting field. There's no ways about it.
What does that run? Like, what is a giant grizzly? Because my uncle actually has one, and he did it years and years ago. But in Alaska, he's got a grizzly bear in his den. But I don't think I ever asked him.
I charge between $1,000 and $1,200 a foot. So, you know, at $1,000 a foot, an 8-foot grizzly is $8,000.
Yeah, I figured about.
Yeah, but now they're getting closer to 10. You know, but we've got so many new taxes up here and things like that it's just. Yeah, everything's gone up so bad that everybody's going broke. Everybody's going bankrupt, and they're not letting up on us either. I think that's what they're trying to do. Is they're trying to break.
Yeah. Plus they canceled the pipeline here, which screws Canada as well, not only just America.
As much as I don't want to talk about politics, I'll tell you what's happening. The same people that run the new American government have been running the government here for 5 years, and they bankrupted us. They're the ones behind it. They're trying to bankrupt the country so that they have an excuse to add it to a new global system.
Yeah.
They spend more money in 4 years than all the governments combined since the beginning of Canada. And then they shut down the energy industry, so there's no way to pay it back.
Right, and there's no dependence. And then they print, and then they're printing here. Then there's 70% more currency they're printing. It's just it's a disaster waiting to happen.
I'm pretty sensitive to things, you know. I've got a pretty good idea usually what's going on, and we're in the process right now of being turned into slaves.
Yeah, that's right, man. It's an elite class, elite ruling class, and a slave class. It's not
travel the world. You know, I've never in my life. Every time I go to a new country, it's a new bunch of news. You know, everything. Nobody knows what everybody else is doing. Everything that's happening here is happening in every single country in the world except China.
Look at England right now. They're enforcing some lockdown where you can go to prison for 10 years if you leave your house because of COVID.
Belgium, Korea, Africa, all the places that I go to, they're all doing the exact same thing. They're in lockstep.
And this is the question I always wonder: is how come some people can see the evidence for that and some people can't, whether it's a Sasquatch, whether it's the New World Order, whether it's any fringe material. There's some people that just, it's like they got a veil in front of them. I don't know what it is.
My brother said it best, and he said there's a certain class of people out there, you know, I'm not going to use the descriptive, whether you want to say liberals or Democrats or anything like that he used, but basically there is a class of people out there that when presented with the evidence are unable to come to a logical conclusion.
Right. Yeah. Well, they're waiting for someone else to tell them what to think.
That's exactly right. I get into debates with people and I almost stop, but I tell them, I says, you know, a parrot can talk perfect English.
Mm-hmm.
I said, but it has no freaking idea what it's saying.
Yeah.
You know?
Preaching the choir, man.
Yeah. Well, I live out in the middle of nowhere, and sometimes it just doesn't feel far enough away.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
You get into these subjects, this stuff inevitably comes up. I mean, people almost feel safe with you. They come to you, they tell you their Bigfoot stories, they tell you all kinds of things. And so you become a safe space for fringe information. So you can't stop at Bigfoot. You got to keep going. Like, what else is out there that I don't know about? Oh, these elites run the world and they're selling kids, and it just gets darker and darker and crazier. Where do you draw the line, and how do you know you have good information? Because that's what I run into is all my friends were debating stuff, and it's like, well, how do we know where's the line? How do we know we're going too crazy, too far?
Well, I spend time partying and singing karaoke in Hollywood with some friends of mine. I have friends from all walks of life, all sides of the political spectrum, and then I've worked at the workshop in Hungary quite a bit. I've been down to Namibia, spent some time down there. So I get a pretty good idea of what's out there. Like even when I went to China, everybody says, they didn't feed you bugs, did they? And I says, you better believe they did. I said, I wasn't there to judge anybody. I was there to understand what's happening in the world, what's really happening, whether I like it or not. I just want to know it. I want to understand. I want to see. I want a broad view of everything if I can. And I mean, the Sasquatch thing, what I find fascinating is how they've been able to keep that thing covered up the way they have. I get a lot of people tell me things like, how come they've never found a dead one? I said, they have.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean? What about, how come they never, this? And I said, who are they? You're talking about they. It sounds like you trust them, whoever you're talking about, more than you trust yourself. Mm-hmm. I said, let's go through a scenario. You're walking through the woods and you find bones. And you look down and you think, whoa, what died here? And you see hair laying on the ground. And then you see a giant human skull. Or, most people don't realize how small a human skull is because it's all inside. You see and your average Sasquatch isn't going to be like one of these 10-foot monsters. It's probably going to be something 7.5 feet. So this thing just looks like a human skull, and you don't really have a trained eye to know how big a human skull is. But all as you know is what you're looking at, those remains look human to you. What do? Wow, I'm going to put this on my shelf. No, you back out and you call the authorities. And I can tell you right now, more than one has been discovered this way. I used to have an anecdote up here where bones were found, and the guy who found them says he didn't know if they were human or if they were animals, so he called the authorities. The authorities released a statement saying they were human but of a historical nature, and they refused to release anything more. And I said, okay, well, if you're an actual logical thinker, ask yourself this question. Why would he say he didn't know if they were animals or human? Because there might have been hair laying amongst there, which would say animal. They might have been a skull that looked an awful lot like a human, and this is what I think happened. So it looks human, but there's no clothes, no buttons, no belt buckles, no pieces of fabric. So you have a person, only in that situation would they be able to make that statement. I didn't know if they were human or if there was animal. Well, there was obviously evidence on site to make him believe that they were one or the other, but he didn't know. He couldn't come to a conclusion, which tells you that there's a high probability that was remains of a Sasquatch. Like somebody said, well, the clothes could have deteriorated. And I said, not in sand, they won't. And these were in sand hills, but obviously sand is very subject to being washed away. And I do know that Sasquatches bury their dead. I know this, okay? They will bury them above ground if the ground is frozen, but they very likely bury them below ground if the ground isn't frozen. The other Sasquatches left gifts of around the grave. That's religion, gifting the dead. Why would you gift the dead? 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 Why would you gift the dead?
So do you think it's more human?
It's a hominid. And it's definitely smarter than us on the ground. And I've had this conversation with people too. They said, well, no, we're the smartest thing in the world. I said, well, I know individuals that think they're the smartest individuals in the world. And usually everybody else kind of realizes they're not. And this is the problem with being self-aware. Sometimes you're just a little too self-aware, and somebody says, well, we build airplanes. And I said, can you build an airplane? Like if you take this pen right here, there is probably 1,000 years of compiled knowledge in this pen. The refining of the plastic, to the making of the ink, to machining the parts or casting them or whatever. What we do that has an advantage over the Sasquatch is that we compile knowledge and we have it stored. Okay, so what somebody said to me, they said, well, how much time do you actually spend out in the woods looking for these things? Like they're superior because they're out there with their boots on the ground. I spend enough time, but I don't waste my time doing it, because I'll talk to two old timers who have been in the woods for 50 years each, and they've each seen 2 Sasquatches. So they tell me their accounts. So that's the equivalence of 100 years of walking around in the trees that I have been able to compile from 2 people. That's why there's 1,000 years in the BFRO database alone of outdoor knowledge or just of life knowledge. It's the best thing we can do, because you're not going to outrun it. You're not going to outthink it. You're not, they see in the dark. They can bench press at Tacoma. Everything that they can physically and mentally do, they do it a lot faster and more than we do one-on-one. I remember walking through the trees in the Alberta Habituation area once, and I ran into Todd Standing, of all people. And I was on my quad. And he said, they can hear that. And I said, do you honestly think you're walking around in here and they're not watching you right now? I said, what you want to do out here is be predictable. Then they will become predictable. That's how I hunt big whitetails. Basically, what I do is I pattern where the does are going, and I become predictable. So the does are uneasy, but they know where I am. But as soon as those does go into estrus, then the bucks come. So basically I've already patterned the does, and they're not reacting to me anymore. And then I'm able to sneak a shot at one of these giant bucks that are so smart that they literally never come out in the daytime. So when you're dealing with Sasquatch, you can't walk out in the woods and think you're going to fool this creature at all.
Yeah, it has to be almost accidental, right? Like, I watched all the Les Stroud series that he did on Bigfoot, and a couple of people pointed out, like, they thought they saw a junior Sasquatch in the woods, like on the trees behind him when he's like filming himself talking, like one swings from one tree to the next.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. They'll be right next to you. You can't tell. And they look like trees.
I also have a theory that people like to come back to me on, and that is, if you look at the best evidence we have, it almost always has to do with a Sasquatch making a mistake. And the only time they seem to make a mistake is if there's young ones involved. Because the young ones aren't, they don't understand. They make mistakes in the
Well, that's what they say about Patty, right? She was
right. 3 sets of tracks they were following, 2 little ones and her. The Freeman footage, he followed it. It picked up a young one and ran away.
Yeah.
The Sierra Kills and some other ones that I have on my radar too. Almost always the Sasquatch will show itself because of a mistake that was made by a young one. That seems to be the common thread. I still think that Patty walked across that clearing the same way that if you ever get near a bird nest, like a duck nest, she'll come out of the nest and she'll run dragging her wing like she's wounded, and to lead you away from where the nest is. Because a predator will say, good, we got a wounded one here, and it'll chase and chase and chase until it gets far enough away it flies away. I still think Patty was doing the exact same thing. That there was a bottleneck in that creek bed. She put the 2 young ones down into a spot, and then she walked out in the open and led them away. Because the story is, they tracked her the next day, and she went all the way around, came back up on top of the hill, watched them until dark, and then came back down. So it makes sense that she showed herself to attract attention away from the young ones. They're super smart, so it makes sense. It just makes sense.
What do you think about all the missing people in the woods? Have you looked into that, and do you think it's related to Bigfoot, Sasquatch? Are they taking people, or how aggressive are these things?
Well, they're dangerous. They can be extremely dangerous. If you compromise one, you're in big trouble. Now, I had a guy come into my shop. I almost don't like talking about this either, because the poor guy never came back, and he left 2 bears here.
Yeah, you got to tell this one.
I was really digging for stories, and he finally relented and said, well, I got something to tell you. And I knew he had a story. I could tell by his reaction, so I just worked on him. And he said that when he first started hunting, he went on a river walk on a river called the Wapiti River, west of Grand Prairie in Alberta, on the Alberta-BC border. That whole area is known for Sasquatches. And he said that he was walking down the river, and he said a big bear, he called it a bear, was standing above the willows and was looking at him, and he got a weird feeling. He said, like somebody was watching me. And he says, I turned around and I looked at it, and he said, it screamed and it charged me. It screamed and charged him. And then as I was watching him, all the color ran out of his face. Then he started to shake. His eyes got glassy. He became emotional. I had to sit him down. And he said he fired 3 shots at it before it turned. And he kept repeating, I'm never going back there. I'm never going back there. He went into like a PTSD episode. And I have never seen such terror in somebody. He relived it. And I kind of chiseled it out of him. I wished I hadn't really now. He said that, I asked him, at any time this bear was running towards you or running away from you, was it ever on all fours? And he just shook his head, no. And I asked him what color it was, and he said, he pointed to with the 2 brown bears, he pointed to the red one, which we all know they're reddish brown, you know. And he said it was that color. And it was like it was blazoned into his mind. And he said that the willows were over his head, you know, about 2 or 3 feet. So the willows, and then he said this thing was standing about 3 or 4 feet above the willows, which put this thing at least 10 feet tall. And this thing screamed and charged him. And he said he was on a river walk. He was 15 years old. And this thing reasoned that they would just have thought he was lost. It reasoned it out. It was a predatory attack. But after 3 shots, it also realized it was going to get shot. So he said he went and looked at the tracks, and, you know, he did this thing with his hands, you know, far bigger than a bear. A 10-foot bear only has a 10-inch back track. I know this because I get them in my shop. I measure them. So, you know, this thing was obviously had like 18-inch plus footprints. Wow. So this thing tried to grab this kid, and it probably reasoned out that they'll just think this kid went lost. I've got anecdotal, and also one of those shooting stories was a direct attack, and it was because there was a compromised situation involving a young one. So yeah, as long as they have the upper hand, you know, they're predictable, like, you know, they're stealthy. But if you ever get one into a compromising situation, they're extremely dangerous and capable of it. And if the animal is real, which it is, it has to be. It lives under the rules of nature. And the rules of nature are: you catch something, you eat it. So there would have to be at least some in the population, just like people. We know a lot of people. We know very few bad ones, but we know there is bad ones. The predatory people. Well, there has to be the same thing with these guys. There has to be some that are just bad.
My thought is hunters, they take the news of Sasquatch probably the hardest, because they go out there, they're the top of the food chain. I mean, people go out with guns and shoot things in the woods. They have a different personality, right? And they think that, and then, you know, versus someone just on a hike and go, did you see that? But I don't know. You talk to hunters, so.
Well, I've talked to hunters who've seen them, who weren't even afraid of them, had them in their scope, and just says, you don't shoot anything that walks on 2 feet. You just don't do it. Most hunters are like that. They would never shoot at anything that, if there was even the slightest hint that it could be a man. And people ask me all the time if I would shoot a Sasquatch, and the answer is no. I know how intelligent these things are, and that's not something you hunt. Something that is that sentient and self-aware is not something that you kill. It's just wrong. But on the other hand, if you end up in a situation where, you know, you have to defend your life, yeah, I'd do that. And I've talked to people who've been in that situation.
Right. It's probably not unlike self-defense, right? Like if you had a bad person that came into your house, and it's you or them, right? I mean,
yeah, like, you know, that's how it works. But when you talk to somebody who's a hunter, they understand what it is to kill something, which is one of the reasons why they're the most least likely to shoot unless they absolutely have to, because it's not unknown ground to them. They know the consequences of what they're about to do. Whereas you get some of these gangbangers that just live in movies, you know, they got no problem shooting at somebody because it's just a movie to them if they don't understand, you know, what they're doing. Whereas a hunter understands very, very well the consequences of pulling the trigger on a person, because they're used to putting big animals down.
Yeah, I say it's not unlike the things we heard from Duke or from Tom Seward, Nate. Like, just the idea there's been certain experiences people have had with this creature that like they take children, or there's the Tom's story about people getting murdered by one. And yeah, I think it's interesting. I think putting the context of the idea that they're cognitive enough, that there may be some that are bad, or some that'll put themselves in a situation, or you put them in a situation where the reason to be stealthy is gone. It's a defense mechanism, or it just happens to be a bad apple that's out there to snatch Nate off the trail.
That's right. Well, if you look at it realistically, if they exist, it has to be that way. They can't exist and not have a dynamic. And that is the dynamic of nature. You take young ones if you can. It's the reason a bear protects its young ones like it does is because it knows that is a food source within nature, and it needs to be protected. So if they exist, then there has to be that dynamic of natural behavior.
Your opinion is a good one, because I think as a taxidermist, I'm just thinking to myself, you have to sort of be in the middle of the road, because your business depends on preserving animals, but also killing animals. So you can't swing too far to either side, or you're out of a job. So you have to kind of stay in the middle, right? Like, you have to have an open mind about many things, because some people probably come to you and say, how could you do what you do? People who are crazy on that other side of just, we shouldn't shoot anything, versus people who will, like you said earlier, will shoot anything.
Yeah.
You fall in the middle of that, right? And it sort of shapes your perspective of the world.
Well, what I do is I get a view of everybody that's out there, because the successful hunters all come to me. But it's funny, because when you abuse anything, and this I don't care if it's driving. If you abuse your car, it's going to wear out. If you drive like a jerk, there's a good chance you're going to kill somebody. Or if you drive drunk, you take some of the, everything in life that we're in control of, including hunting. If you abuse it, you can twist it into something bad. It can be something really, really good, or it can be something really, really bad. I mean, you can go so far as to say that about sex, of all things, I mean, it could be a wonderful thing, or it can be used in horrific ways. It just depends on the individuality of the people that you're dealing with, and I think that applies to the Sasquatch as well, and it definitely applies to hunters. That's why I have rules and regulations. Somebody brings in a bear, and if I say, where's the tag? They'll look at me and smile or something like that and say, well, I figured a bigger one was going to come along, so we can always just write that down as being shot on private land, right? Because it's legal to shoot them on private land without tagging them, but obviously this guy was on state land, and he just committed a poaching offense and just told me about it. And I have to explain to him that he has two choices. He can take the bear out of my shop and never come back, or he can take it out and bring it back with a tag on it. And if they say, well, what's the big problem? I says, you just told me that you did something wrong. Now I know. I can lose my license, my livelihood, and things like that. So, we have to be cognizant of these type of people that are out there in this business too. Because like you say, you can't swing too far to each side, And I can't criticize a person for shooting something that I wouldn't hunt, because that's being a hypocrite.
Right. Right.
Yeah, as long as it's legal and the animal has to be managed, that's why we have hunting seasons.
And most people don't get that. They don't understand management,
No, well, when you're educated about what hunting is and how it works and why it works and why it's needed, then you can come to understand. But if you let emotions get into the way, like I talk to people in the Sasquatch realm that believe that there's some sort of angelic creature that comes from a interdimensional porthole that is here to teach us a lesson in life, And I said, well, that doesn't explain why they smell so bad, And I love theories, and I don't discount people. I don't do it, but
they're not arriving on UFOs. You don't think?
No.
I don't know. I have no idea. I'm just. That's a theory.
I'll tell you why, and I've had people, ask me this theory all the time, and I says I have never had a hunter's encounter where he saw a Sasquatch and a UFO together. I've never had that. Now, other people say they have. But personally, of all the people I've talked to, they've never combined the phenomenon. Okay, now I've talked to a lot of people who've seen UFOs. I've talked to a lot of people who've seen Sasquatches. But I have never talked to anybody personally that has correlated the two together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step back and I'm going to wait for that. Okay? That's what I'm going to do. I don't want to jump to a conclusion unless I have something to base it on. And I just find that's, you know, look at in the old days, like, you know, basically when the natives just ran everything. You know, there was no technology. Everybody was Stone Age people here. Well, the Aurora Borealis would come. We all know that. Sun flares, they don't know that. That's magic to them. Mm-hmm. They'll come up and they'll name a deity that dances with the Northern Lights. You know, and they got stories that they've passed on for generations. It's because they don't have a rational way to explain it, so they come to a conclusion. You know, the sun is a god. It brings life to plants. They're not far from the truth, but we know how the sun works. But they'll worship the sun because they don't have a plausible explanation for anything else. I have witnessed an encounter that I believe extremely firmly was a Sasquatch, and I saw somebody lose their memory.
Like Men in Black style.
Like that, and like erased. After they went outside the tent and screamed and fainted, and they were literally, they literally have, to this day, I've talked to him, he lives in Norway, I was guiding him. And then I talked to Adrian Erickson once, who talked to a friend of his, and he said that he encountered a female and a small Sasquatch and a male Sasquatch, and he said that they appeared to be appearing and vanishing, and he became extremely disorientated, and he realized finally, he told me, and he didn't know about my experience. I was just collecting this, I'm listening. And he said that his friend told him that there were snippets of his memory that were being erased that was making it appear like they were vanishing and then reappearing. And he said he realized because of his disorientation that he was actually having snippets of his memory erased. I find that to be very compelling because I can compare it to a couple of other stories that are along the same lines.
Wow. Okay?
But I don't want to jump to conclusions, but this is, you know, and I've had theories about electromagnetic energy. A lot of people talk about infrasound, but I use hex suits to hunt. The HECS, you can go to their website. It's called Human Energy Concealment Systems. And basically you can get very, very close to an animal when you have no electromagnetic signature. They use a Faraday cage made of carbon filaments in the clothes. And I use them for hunting myself. And I've had animals walk right up to me and not know what I am because they can't sense me. So I think there's varying degrees of electromagnetic manipulation in species of animals. We all know dogs communicate. Wolf packs, they all know what the other ones are going to do. And a dog also knows how you're feeling. And I put my hex suit on and walk outside, and my dog is scared of me. And
That's
barks.
crazy.
Yeah. So I have theories, but they're just theories. Now, I have tested them. When Dan and I were filming Bigfoot, we were down at the Alberta Habituation site, the exact same place where apparently Jeff Meldrum saw one. And I believe he saw one because they're always there. And I called one in the middle of a cold night when they gather there, when the trapper told me they're there. I told him, I said, it'll come downwind, it'll come onto that ridge. And I gave 2 quick calls. I said, we won't know it's there, but your dog will go crazy. I said, does your dog ever pee itself and get really scared and like get terrified? I said, you might want to tie it up. He said, no. And I said, I have no mystical, magical powers over your dog. And he said, I know that. And I said, okay. Well, within about 10 minutes, that dog went nuts, and it was fixed on that ridge. And I said, he came in, and I said, somehow or another, he scanned us. And somehow or another, the dog picked it up. They're sensitive to it. And I said, that was me testing my theory. But I said, one thing I can tell you, and his eyes were this big. I was just drinking some wine out of a glass by the campfire. I just told him, I said, I can tell you there is a Sasquatch on that ridge, and he's leaving. He's probably not happy. He's busted. He knows because the dog's here, and they don't like dogs, and now you know why. You know, if you're ever going to go out and look for one, bring a dog and put it on a leash, and watch your dog, because it seems like there's something going on with the electromagnetic field.
Yeah, I've heard they don't like dogs.
Yeah. Now, you also have to remember too, and people say, well, how does they create electricity? And I said, well, an eel this big will kill you if you step on it. As a matter of fact, if you're riding a horse, and the horse steps on an electric eel, it'll kill the horse and you. Like, they can put that much of a charge. Now, imagine how much electricity they could generate if they weighed 1,500 pounds. So the other thing people say is that their eyes will shine red sometimes.
Yeah.
And yet other people have seen their eye shine as being green or blue like your usual eye shine.
Yeah.
Well, if you could actually illuminate the backs of your eyes, they would shine red because of the blood vessels. So it makes sense. And I've talked to people who, especially natives, that say their eyes shine red when there's no light source. You know, and if you look, you'll find these anecdotes. So it's, to me, it's not, I don't come to any conclusions over it, but it's definitely food for thought. You know, I put it all together and then I try to come up with a view. But I mean, until, like you say, until we could actually sit down with one of these creatures, you're not going to know any of this stuff.
It's interesting how, like, your whole perspective, because for me, it keeps coming back to that middle of the road idea, because some people write off Native American stories as too weird. Like, oh, they just worship the sun, right? So you can't trust their opinions, but they have thousands of years of battling giant hominids in their folklore and seeing wild man of the woods and having hundreds of names for Sasquatch, and all the, you know, educated academia folks are just like, oh, they're crazy. And I hate that, because it's so dismissive of their experience and their culture and their history. And I get it. They have a little bit more of a supernatural explanation of things, but don't discount everything. But you kind of have to, I don't know, that's sort of the theme of what's going on in this episode. I'm kind of picking up on that you can't go too far one way or you lose something, right?
If you look at that, what was that book that David Paulides wrote about?
Missing 411?
No, before that, he wrote one about Sasquatches and native settlements. And if you do any research, you will find that your best habituation sites are very close to native settlements. They always are, including the one I go to. And the natives there, they're real secretive, but they did tell me they come to the drums.
Wow. So this is in the right vein. I got some questions, some follow-up questions. So you worked as a taxidermist at the Smithsonian.
Yes, I did. Before my investigations, because I missed a very, very amazing chance to inquire about the giant skeletons.
That's what I wanted to get at. I was like, when you were there, because there's all these theories, and we're talking on theories. There's always theories about the Smithsonian and the suppression of evidence, or the disappearing of bones, or the disappearing of evidence. Did you go into these back warehouses or have any inkling of anything like that, or nefarious maybe going on there?
Yeah, well, I've talked to people since that I worked with at the Smithsonian. They said it wouldn't surprise them at all. You know, they said it wouldn't surprise us at all. There's a culture of that, of suppressing. You know, when I walk through the hominid galleries where they've got one of every type of person in a drawer, their bones are all in a drawer, like arranged, and it'll say, you know, European female, 16 years old, and it'll say, you know, a Russian male, 85 years old, like hundreds and hundreds of different people.
That's crazy.
Their bones that are in there. And as a matter of fact, the guy I worked with, Paul Reimer, one of the guys I worked directly with in the Mammal Hall, was the one who set up the skeleton of, what's his name? Grover
Krantz?
Grover Krantz and his elk hound. You know, they actually put his skeleton on display playing with the skeleton of his elk hound. That was one of the guys I worked with that actually set up his skeleton.
So you didn't see anything shady when you worked there?
I wasn't looking for it. I did see one thing. One thing. They showed me a bear skull that was supposed to be a black bear that would have been the world record, almost as big as the world record Alaskan brown bear. And they were coming to the conclusion that it could have been a hybrid between a black bear and a grizzly bear, or it could have been a throwback to a prehistoric black bear. But I held that skull in my hands, and the first thing I noticed was the teeth were perfect. Meaning, for as big as this creature was, it was not old. And there's been a lot suppressed about exactly what that bear is. I looked at the morphology of the skull and I came to the conclusion that it could easily have been a hybrid between a black bear and a grizzly. But it was definitely way outside the size parameters of a black bear. Because, you know, you take the length and the width and you add them together for the trophy score. And I think 21 inches or 22 or 23 inches is the biggest black bear on record. This thing was 30.
Wow.
Yeah, like a Alaskan brown bear. And so when I asked about, do you think there's suppression of other creatures that have come into there, the person that I worked with brought up that skull and says, look at this one. a lot of the information is unavailable. I was just lucky enough to hold it in my hands, so I know it's real.
That's what we talk about a lot on our show. We brought on several guests who've curated thousands of articles from 1850 to the early 1900s of giant skeletons being, dug up, and then the Smithsonian shows up, and it's just the narrative over and over and over again. In fact, we make memes about it now to post on our social media. The bones going missing. I mean, why would they steal the bones? And do you believe in giants?
Yeah. Well, I have through a trapper that I know, located in the middle of nowhere, a mound, and that's where they found these skeletons supposedly. So I'm hoping to get a crew together and we're going to go into this mound.
Man, can we come?
Yeah, we want to go.
I don't know when it's going to happen. We've got some plans to stay completely off the radar when we do it, but it was funny because I mentioned it to the guy, and the guy said, I know where one of these things is. He told me, he said, it's remote. And he goes, I often wondered what it was.
Yeah, 2 Americans coming to Canada this time with this weird stuff. It's not exactly conspicuous.
Yeah, you can't even cross the border of this stupid pandemic.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you got to... I mean, they're locking people in hotel rooms and stuff. I've been reading about it. It's crazy.
Under armed people, and they're not telling anybody where they are. And they're doing that right in my city here in Edmonton.
Wow.
And they predicted it,
So, listen, this was fun. I loved that part of the doc was the singing, the karaoke, because I'm a big karaoke guy. But Nate was actually in a band that toured for almost 15 years. So there's 2 very good singers and just one dude with a big beard in this chat right now. But have you gotten any good feedback about singing? Have you done anything like that lately? Because I like karaoke, but I think I'm more of a performance guy. I'm like I'll make it look ridiculous, but it doesn't sound very good. Whereas you sound great, and it's like that's why I don't go karaoke with Nate, because Nate can actually sing.
Yeah, you got it. It helps to be a mimic if you're going to karaoke. It helps to be able to mimic. I've always been able to mimic. There's one piece in the movie where I actually am imitating Roy Orbison, and that's where the scene where I was practicing the song "It's Over," which is one of the hardest songs to sing by Roy. And I was holding my baby daughter, that if you listen to that, I was impersonating him. But the only reason there's only that much of the clip is because my kids recorded over the tape,
That's how it goes, right? Get those VHS tapes, and then it's like, oh, sorry about Christmas last year. Something else is going over the top of it.
Yeah, but I really like the way In Dreams turned out. And Dan released Pretty Woman on YouTube. So there's a YouTube video of Pretty Woman that wasn't actually in the movie. And then I wrote the song at the end called Big Fur's Gonna Fly, and we released a video on that.
Well, I love this theme because, we've heard so many stories of Bigfoot mimicking logging trucks, other animals, sounding like owls, sounding like all kinds of things, and they have this ability to do their own karaoke out in the woods.
Yeah, they're big mimics. I've had them whistle. I've heard them whistle, but in the Alberta Habituation area, I haven't even heard a tree knock in there. They know that the people are onto them, so they don't even do that. It was funny because we crossed the creek there. I had a couple of kids with me that wanted to go out there, and their parents. And one whistled as soon as the first person crossed the creek, and it was like, shh, just a whistle. Then another one answered, shh. So I whistled back, and there was a hesitation, and then one answered me. And then the kids got all excited because I told them to listen for whistles. And so they all started trying to whistle. And suddenly a third one from further back did a staccato whistle, like, and it all stopped. And that was, stop it, they're onto us.
That was Mom saying, time to stop.
I think what it was is that they always try to do noises in the background that they can actually communicate with that we just consider to be noise, a bird, a branch, or things like that. And once they know you're onto what they're doing, they stop doing it. It's just like they don't make footprints. I found their footprints up there only in matted grass, not worth casting but they walk, they know you're looking for their footprints, so they walk where they won't make them. They're sentient and self-aware and very, very smart. And, it's like I tell everybody they're smarter than us. And they said, how do you figure? I says, well, they know all about us and we know nothing about them.
Yeah. And I thought about that with David Paulides, researching his stuff. And he talks a lot about boulders and granite rocks being associated with disappearances. And I think maybe that goes along with the footprints thing. They want to walk on rocks. They don't want to be seen. And if they can, especially in Northern California, there's rock trails for miles and miles. So
yep.
Maybe they just walk along those rocks and snatch up kids and take off.
Well, the trapper told me that he almost always sees them in a snowstorm. He said when there's a snowstorm, he said once the weather gets like that, he says, I just know I'm going to see one in there. He says they walk in the storm. He says it covers their tracks. Take a look at northern encounters, like how many people see them in a snowstorm, and that's the vast majority, actually.
Have you heard any stories about any creatures bigger than Bigfoot out in North Canada? Because that's kind of one of the things we talk a lot about on our show is the ancient giants. We've really talked about that the most, and that's kind of why the Smithsonian perked us up real quick, because we talked a lot about that. But anything else? Any other weirder creatures out there besides Bigfoot?
Well, there's the trapper told me that there's one Sasquatch that comes into the valley. It's the biggest track he's ever found. Now, I know he's found 19-inch tracks in the other place. The girl that's in the movie that saw the Sasquatch, and we were out there on site, Dawn Larondel, she's a very smart girl. She's a taxidermist as well. The second one she saw is where the winter habituation is. I went and stood where it stood, and it was over a berm. And when she said, she knew exactly where it was, because she said it turned to the left and walked between those two trees. She says it walked in a straight line. She says, so she told me to keep moving, and then once she told me that's where it was standing, she could see this much of me over the berm. And I asked her, I said, how much of the Sasquatch did she see? She said, I saw it from the hips up.
Wow.
So basically, my eyes came up to its hips. And it just so happens to be where the trapper finds that big footprint that appears every December. And she saw this thing in December, January.
I think that's 15 foot?
I would say it sounds like it's 11, 12 foot anyways. And I never got a direct measurement from the trapper as to how long that track was. I know they found them 22 inches long. And she said it was all gray and it shone silver when the sun hit it. So they all say the old ones are gray. Now, the trapper did say that once the snow hits, they leave his trap line. He says they come back to his bait stations and they pilfer all his coyotes. That's what they eat. They eat coyotes, believe it or not. And he said you will not see a medium or a small track again until March when it warms up. March, April. And so basically what it sounds like is they take the young ones and the females and they put them into a place, and then the big ones collect food and then come back, from what he's describing from his.
You think they're going underground?
There is a cave, and a good one, and it's right there. We know that it's full of dead animals, like bighorn sheep, moose, elk, and they're carried into there. Now, the location of that cave is a lot of people trying to find it. I know where it is. I did tell one person sort of where it is, but I wouldn't walk in there for all the tea in China.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't walk out.
Well, this is the thing. And also, too, don't be surprised if they actually, when they're not using that cave, don't be surprised if they actually cover the entrance.
Oh, yeah.
The bed where I collected the scat, when the snow melted, they came in and they carried everything away. They cleaned it up because we'd messed with it.
Luke wouldn't walk in there for all the bones in the Smithsonian either.
I might, actually. I might.
You might.
Yeah, just to to be the sacrificial lamb for all the bones. Yes.
Take the team. I'm scared. I don't let bears. Like I was a professional bear hunting guide for years. There's a certain circle around me. I do not let a bear inside.
Ken, what's next for you? The movie came out in 2019. Have you had requests to make any more Bigfoot? Big feet, I should say, plural. And what's happened since the film?
Well, there's not as many people have actually seen the film as I thought, and I get people reaching out to me now that it's on Amazon Prime and people can actually see it. I'm talking to some people right now that absolutely want a Sasquatch. I just need to find out what they want. I still want to build a big male model, and one of the reasons I gave away the Patterson model, Patty, from the movie is I mean, I had to make it for the movie. I had to make it quickly. I wasn't really happy with it. I could do a far better job than that. So I made molds of all of the pieces. I have everything here. So I would love to have time to sit down and make a better one. The only problem is, since my divorce and everything, and with all these new taxes and stuff, I'm literally working 7 days a week just to tread water here to pay bills. Like, my bills have gone up at least $2,000 a month with all of these extra taxes and stuff. And it's tough. Like, I just, I'm actually right now looking at either having to sell my place and get something more affordable, or I've talked to my 2 children and sign it over to them as long as I can stay here when I'm in the country and work here. And it's leaning towards that.
So there's not a lot of time for pet projects, I'd imagine.
That's exactly right. Like, I'm basically doing client work and and then repairing things and just basically working to survive. There's so many cool things that I could be doing that I just can't do, which includes designing product, because I get royalties from that. And once I have enough of that, then I can basically make a living without working. I get royalties from the product I design. That's going to be hopefully my retirement, because we all know that, with this great reset that the world's talking about, the only thing we can look forward to instead of retirement is euthanasia. They're already doing it in Canada. They're doing it in Canada. They call it doctor-assisted suicide. And I kept telling everybody, it only takes a stroke of a pen to go from doctor-assisted to doctor-recommended, And now there's a new thing coming up in Canada, and you won't hear about this in the mainstream media, but there's a bill before the Canadian Parliament where disabled people can choose that rather than be a burden on the system.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean,
that sounds like Nazism.
And it's
happening.
It's inhumane. I mean,
they're feeding people information only what they want you to hear, not what you need to hear. There's lots of stuff going on. It's spooky, And I'm getting old, so I'm starting to feel threatened here.
Well, Ken, if you need to escape, man, in Tennessee, we'll provide a little sanctuary for you.
We have still a little freedom down here in Tennessee. Yeah,
it's the same thing up here. We have provinces, which you call states, and we have blue states and we have red states. I happen to live in a red province, so we have a lot more freedom than the guys 2 provinces over.
I worry about Alberta though because of the energy stuff. It's like Edmonton itself. I have friends in Edmonton. It's so dependent on that industry. That's a lifeblood that they're trying to choke
14
out.
14 suicides a day in Edmonton.
Gosh, it's awful, man. Yeah.
Well, the conspiracy theories. A lot of people are saying that these New World Order people are on the chopping block right now, and that we're about to have a change. I don't know if you subscribe to some of that, but some people say that it's the dark before the dawn and a new time is rolling in. But I don't know. Sometimes it looks like it's just going to get worse, though. So it's hard to tell.
They're looking up for a while, but they're not now. Right now, they're not looking up. I've heard the things about them trying to usher in a new system. That's what they're doing. And they have to collapse the old system and tell everybody, collapse it on purpose and then convince everybody the old system never worked. Everybody's got to drink the Kool-Aid. But the problem is you're going to end up with roughly 50% of the people that still ain't going to buy it. And if you look at history, they have ways of dealing with that 50% of the people. Just have to look at history. Whether it's Stalin, whether it's Mao Zedong, whether it's the Khmer Rouge, it all comes to the same end. People need to wake up.
Yeah, that's why they're trying to disarm us.
Did you know in Canada right now they've just made over 2,000 firearms illegal, and they're working on a plan to come collect them as we speak?
Yeah,
jeez,
it's all sad.
Yeah, they call a semi-automatic. It's not a semi-automatic anymore. It's called an assault rifle, and now they're referring to guns with scopes on them as sniper rifles. You said changing the terminology to get people ready.
It's conditioning. It's just conditioning. Yeah.
Yeah. They have IBM. IBM is now working on the so-called, we'll call it a buyback program. Look into it. They're adding guns, including shotguns. They're adding guns every day that are now illegal. There's a grace period of 2 years, as they say. But now they're trying to pass a law right now to have the mail-in voting and ballot harvesting that you guys had to deal with. And then they'll call a spring election, and then the Liberals will have a majority government because they can just stuff the ballot boxes. So yeah, it's a problem everywhere.
Well, that's when you just got to sell your guns to the dead people who voted, right?
I don't have any guns. Nobody's turning their guns in.
Nobody will. Nope. And they just had. I mean, I've got buddies in the gun industry, and the boom this last year too is insane. How many actually firearms were sold? Yeah. It's going to become unmanageable for.
They've become a commodity they're illegal. You know, there's drug dealers out there right now that are more than willing to deal in firearms because of it. Yeah. And it's, I mean, the whole thing is so stupid because there's so many examples in history where this has gone really wrong. The last thing I'm ever going to do with my gun is, my guns that I have here, is go out and harm somebody. It's unthinkable to me. And yet I'm the guy they want to disarm. But then again, my grandfather was the same way. But he was born in 1896, and he picked up his gun twice and went to war. He was a good man, So what they're trying to do is they're trying to disarm all the good men.
Yeah, we talk about some of this stuff on our podcast. Every time we do, we get a 1-star review. And
well, it is what it is,
It's like people hate it. They can talk about Bigfoot all day long, and if you try to push them a little bit further than that, they snap at you. So
stars are like antlers. You can't really eat them,
Yeah.
I like that. That's a good analogy. I like that.
And I mean, it's kind of like in my favorite line in all of Bigfur is that there's a lot of people think that I've lost my mind, and that's okay. That was my favorite line in the whole show because that's exactly how I feel. If people don't like what I got to say or don't believe me or anything like that, just be glad you have the individual right to not agree.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, everybody loses their individual rights.
We had our last guest on our show. A buddy emailed me. He's like, "Hey, I'm actually good friends with the guest's brother, but he doesn't entertain any conspiracy theories, but he's just as smart." And I said, he sounds like a real boring guy. Like if you don't talk about the weird stuff in life, it's just no fun. I don't know. I always enjoy these fringe topics. So
well, I mean, who knows? You just don't know about people. I mean, it's nice to have individual rights, but they didn't even know about J. Edgar Hoover until he showed up at the morgue wearing ladies' underwear. I mean, there's just so many things out there that people, as individuals, will keep from you. You don't really know what's in the hearts of people. But
yeah,
and a lot of smart people right now are starting to become quiet about what they're doing. They're trying to demonize literally 50% of the population. I think 60%.
Yeah.
Of the population now. They're trying to demonize. Like it's crazy. Like. People will call me a racist because of my beliefs. I'm the farthest thing from a racist you'll ever meet. But listen, a jerk is a jerk. It don't matter what color they are. I'll call anybody a jerk who's a jerk. I don't care what color of their skin,
Right.
Or look at the people. Like we lose when you put people into groups, okay, instead of individually, it's easy to take away their humanity. And that's the first step, like you look what Hitler did. There was Mr. Goldstein who lived down the road. He used to help feed everybody every Friday in the soup kitchen. He was a wonderful man. And then there was Mr. Joburg, who worked at the bank, who wouldn't give anybody a loan. He was a jerk, right? But they were both Jewish. But once Hitler convinced everybody that they weren't individual people, they were just the Jews, they were able to dehumanize them and then exterminate them. The exact same thing is happening right now, my friends. And all you have to do is call somebody, a white supremacist or this or that. Like they're categorizing people by what they consider to be their race and their beliefs, and then they're dehumanizing them. And that's going to lead to something sinister. History is repeating itself.
That's the sad. And the sad thing is that the tribalism that's going on. It does dehumanize, and when our defining factor is our melanin instead of the content of our character, then we completely lost not only the dream of Martin Luther King and really the idea of a meritocracy and freedom. We've trivialized everything down to the lowest common denominator, which ends up being the melanin in our skin, which I think is absurd. And even the terminology, like a racist, or it's lost all meaning now. It's just, it becomes something that someone you don't agree with ideologically, and it's absurd.
Whenever I debate those people and they want to call me a Nazi, I tell them that I don't want to hear that word Nazi. I said, you have to call them what they really were. You have to refer to them as the National Socialist Party of Germany. And they say they weren't socialists. I said, no, they were the National Socialist Party of Germany. I said, you're all trying to rewrite history.
It's been like the year of projections. Like everything they're saying that you're doing is what they're doing. It's almost mind blowing. I'm glad you can see it though, and I'm glad we have
It's 100% projectionism. Do you want to know this? You guys are a paranormal thing, right?
We're more of a creature thing. We talk just creatures.
Well,
yeah.
This always comes back to it. But when I was 27 years old, I broke my arm, and I went into cyanotic shock, and they sat me up in a chair. And for all sakes and purposes, I died. All the blood ran out of my brain. Apparently, I wasn't breathing. I had no pulse. There was a nurse there. And everybody was all upset. They all watched me die. But what happened to me during that time was that I started to fly. I turned into light, and I flew straight up into a big round light. And then I tried to get through. And it was the nicest experience I've ever had. It was the most amazing thing in the world. And I got in a big argument with whoever was supposed to let me through that light. They said I couldn't. I had to go back. And I didn't want to go back. And so we got in this big discussion or argument. I remember knowing everything. I remember telling him it was my choice to go back, and I wasn't going back. But the funny thing was, I ended up back, and I ended up waking up in a great mood just as the ambulance pulled up. But from that day forward, I never experienced fear again. I've lived completely without fear. I don't have fear. Like people always say, well, aren't you worried? Aren't you afraid of ridicule? I don't even know what that is. So probably one of the reasons that all this brainwashing doesn't work on me is because it's all fear-based. And fear doesn't work on me anymore. Since I was 27 years old, I'm afraid of nothing.
If you remove the fear of death, if you're no longer afraid of that, then there's not a whole lot left.
I don't fear death, but boy, I respect it.
We talk a lot about this stuff on our show in an indirect way, but I mean that there's Bible verses that say, that God has not given us a spirit of fear. So if you subscribe to that, and I do, it's almost like where the fear is, you don't want to go down that road.
No, I've talked to people who've had the same experience. I'm drawn to them. I almost know who they are. It's weird.
Yeah.
And they all tell me the same thing. And everybody comes out of it extremely spiritual. People always ask me, well, do you believe in God? I said, there is a God. I can tell you that right now. There's something there. It doesn't end. It does not end. I know this. A lot of people have to have faith that it doesn't end.
Yeah.
Faith is very important, and belief and faith are two different things. Belief is you fall in the water and you're treading water because you believe somebody's coming to save you. Okay? Faith is when you run out of energy and you can't go on for another second, you're able to tread for another hour. That's faith. They're two different things. And I understand them both. And whenever people bring the religious aspect into the Sasquatch argument, I stop them. And I tell them that this is not going to happen. There are two different things. We're not gonna combine them. And they says, well, how many people have seen God and how many people have seen a Sasquatch? I said, I've had an experience that makes me believe completely in God that I don't want to talk about in relation to this other one. I said, they're two different things. I come back from that whole experience knowing that how we treat people in our lives is instrumental on what happens when we go through that round light. You could be the richest guy in the world, but if you stepped on people to do it, man, you're not going to pass the test.
That's right.
I know this, So, there's that aspect of it.
Yeah. Ken, you have a great heart. It sounds like you're an optimist. You're a positive person, and we appreciate you sharing stories, giving us all the details on Sasquatch and other things up there. Luke and I, we've been kicking around the idea because there's not very many documentaries about giants. We've been kicking around the idea of that just seems to be the theme on our show. So if you ever come across anything like that,
let us know about this mound. Yeah, if there's anything that we need to hear about. Let us know.
what's the anecdotal evidence of giants? Like, how big are you talking? Like,
oh man,
that is a question. Nate likes to think the bigger the better.
Well, I mean, in newspaper reports, 18, 19 is usually the biggest.
Okay.
But there's a lot of people in this space that like really think it's like 10 to 12 to.
Well, I know Sasquatch get that big. I know they do. Yeah. Like I haven't really, I haven't really heard a lot of anecdotal evidence of something other. I follow the Dogman sightings a little bit, and one of the BFRO investigators said that down by Waterton, somebody did report seeing a Dogman. I've never had anybody tell me they've seen one.
Nate loves a Dogman.
I saw something like that as a kid.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't doubt it at all because there's too many people saying they've seen it.
But I don't know if mine felt more demonic, honestly.
Well, it's funny. Creepy. I got a ghost in this house, and everybody sees her. I've never seen her. But a lot of people in this house said, "There's a girl in your house wearing a long white dress."
She sees you, Ken. She sees you.
Yeah, well, but I heard somebody say my name once. A girl said my name right in the kitchen.
I'd be moving if that was happening to me.
But it's funny because people, I mean, if it's somebody that I can't 100% trust, I almost always see her. It's almost like she's like, I'm watching you. I had a neighbor. He was working on the fence out here, and I always worry because I've caught him trying to get into my house. He asked who the girl was that came out on the porch and stared at him in the long white dress. I said, came out on the porch? And he said, yeah, was it Chantel, your daughter? And I said, I think it was her, but she wouldn't talk to me. And I said, no. And then Chantel told him that was a ghost. Well, he won't come in the yard no more,
That's great. Win-win.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, we can't thank you enough for your time, man. Thanks for coming on.
Where can people get in touch with you or see what you're doing, or is there you have a website or?
I've just basically got right now. I just haven't had any time to devote to a website. Just basically a Facebook page.
Yeah.
And I just literally don't have time for almost anything, which is really unfortunate. But I'm working on changing that.
Well, we appreciate your time then, and we extra appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah.
And watch the film. It's called Big Fur. It's an amazing biopic review, not only of Ken's life, but of his creation of a taxidermy Bigfoot, directly frame by frame out of the Patterson-Gimlin film. So fantastic. Super cool to see. Really cool.
Yeah, you just start selling those Bigfoot for like $25,000 each, and you'll be fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's pretty much what I got. I have to charge for them. But I've had a lot of people look at the model and say that's what I saw. A lot of them.
Oh, I know. That's what I was saying before the show started. I mean, you gave people a window into into the eyes of Bigfoot. You can see him, touch him, feel him. I think it's great. It's a work of art. You're true talent. Thanks for coming on the show. And if you find anything giant related or anything like that, let us know. We want to know. Well, if you dig into that mound, I guarantee you'll find some giant skeletons if it hasn't been dug into already. So
this is in an area where no one's going to find it. It's like really remote.
Because that's where all the reportings happen. People dug into the mounds, and then they put a kibosh to it. The government said you can't dig into them. They're Native American, but they actually predate the Native Americans. So there you go. That's what our show's all about.
If we come up with a type specimen out of it, it's going to be revealed.
Good. Don't give it to the Smithsonian.
Yeah, don't.
Well, the thing is now I even have plans to 3D scan every bone.
Oh, I like that.
Put them into a hard drive, so that even if it's taken away from me, I can print it out.
Yeah. Well, they have 6 fingers, 6 toes, big heads. There's a lot of weird deformities, so you'll know right away if it's giant.
Well, whatever's in there's coming out, so that's how it's going to be. But
I'm jealous.
I've got a small team together because I'm more worried about what might come and try and have a word with me for digging.
Oh yeah. Well, we can say that on our show. All the guns that all of us own mysteriously vanished in a boating accident, so we don't have any more guns. Sorry if you're listening.
Yep.
And
great, yeah.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks for having me. It was great.
Yep. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Take care, you guys.
Talk soon.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.